We're very fortunate to have opening the conference Ms. Ita Buttrose, and she is considered the probably most famous woman in Australian media, and probably one of the most famous women in Australia, in actual fact. She's made a name for herself over the 4 decades as a journalist, a publisher, an author, a businesswoman, an advisor to the corporate community and welfare sectors. And in 1988 she was appointed an officer of the Order of Australia. And that was for service to the community, particularly in the fields of medical education and healthcare. So Ita has had a distinguished career as a journalist, but she also has a significant interest in the healthcare sector, as she'll tell you. And most recently, in 2007, she published a book called Get in Shape. So I think it's very appropriate to have someone of Ita's distinguished background to open the conference. And Ita, please welcome.
Thank you very much and good morning. On this lovely Sydney Saturday morning, we've saved it up especially for you. I am delighted to have been asked here this morning to open the 2nd Australian Anti-Aging Medicine Conference. I find the whole concept of anti-aging medicine exciting, and I'm looking forward to learning more about what you do while I'm here with you this morning. I've had a long interest in ageing issues, prompted no doubt by the fact that I am getting older myself. But I can still remember the shock I felt when I turned 50 and received a copy of the Senior Citizens newspaper with a note that said, "Now that you're one of us." I wouldn't have a bar of it, and I rang the editor and I said, if I were a senior citizen at 50, what did that make my father, who was then 85? Old is a word most people fear because it's associated with slowing down, even breaking down, of mental fragility, of being tossed on the scrap heap, of failing faculties and ill health, and of no longer being valued. Ageing is an unknown world to which we must all travel, and because it obviously represents change, a change in lifestyle, a change in the things we are still able to do, a realisation that one day we might be dependent on others, we fear it. Sometimes when I visit my elderly aunt, she's 91, and until recently her husband, who died a few months ago at 93, in their respective nursing homes, I do get a bit depressed myself about what might lie ahead for me. Many residents have a lifestyle that can only be described as a living death, and I tell myself there has to be a better way. I thank God for my good genes, but I don't take them for granted. I work hard to maintain both my physical and mental ability. I don't profess to be perfect at doing this, but I am committed to my health and well-being because I know that I have a better chance of living well to the end of my days if I continue to push myself both physically and mentally. I think as we age, we have a tendency to subconsciously put brakes on ourselves. Our inner voice says things like, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't do that anymore. Maybe I shouldn't jog anymore because I'm getting older." And it wasn't until I was asked to be a part of the TV show Celebrity Overhaul that I realised I was guilty of doing this myself. I was utterly offended when I was first approached, by the way, and said, "No, how dare they suggest that I might need an overhaul?" And I declined a second time too. But about the same time, I came across a couple of books that I tucked away because I was intrigued by the titles. Strong Women Stay Young, Strong Women Stay Fit. And it was all to do with using weights. So when the Celebrity Overhaul producers rang me for the 3rd time, begging me to do the show, I agreed on the proviso that they taught me how to use weights. So the deal was done, and I was overhauled, and, and I learned how to do weights, and I went to the gym. I was a gym virgin up until then, and although I said I wasn't interested in losing weight, I mean, you know, I was really still offended. I did, in fact, lose 3 dress sizes, and I'm not at all unhappy about that. But a couple of things that I particularly remember. The first was that the medical and fitness people associated with the show were surprised at just how fit I was, and that, in fact, I was fitter than most of the younger contestants. And just because I was older, they had made assumptions about me, like everybody does about older people. And secondly, I discovered that I could push myself further physically than I had thought possible. And I think that is a very important message to give to older people, especially as we now know that physical exercise has positive benefits for our brains. There are plenty of studies to support this, as you would know. And only this week I read about an American study that indicates that exercise might benefit people with early Alzheimer's disease. I'm a member of the Advisory Committee of the Alzheimer's Association of New South Wales. And at our most recent meeting a couple of weeks ago, we heard about research being done here in Sydney at the Garvan Institute on brain regeneration. Some of you would know more about that than me, but that kind of discovery offers so much hope for the future. In whatever part of the globe we live, human beings are living longer. And never before in the world's history have people lived as long as they do today. Older people are now outnumbering younger people, and we are moving from a youth economy to an older person's economy. There are predictions, and none of them at all positive as far as I can make out, that an age quake is coming. So are we to assume, therefore, that the world will come crumbling down because some of us are daring to get older? Well, I hope not. But are enough countries prepared for the advent of a world in which older people will be dominant? I don't think so. I certainly don't think Australia is prepared. At the Prime Minister's recent 2020 summit, where problems of the future were meant to be addressed, I didn't see much evidence of any discussion about ageing or any of the issues associated with it, and the ramifications that it will have on every aspect of our lives: employment, education, housing, travel, transport, care and health, particularly health. If we look at countries in our region, such as China, Singapore, Korea, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, India and the Philippines, they will all experience a significant ageing of their populations during the next 50 years. But their preparedness for an ageing population is decidedly mixed, not just in terms of health, but in the areas of pensions, health insurance and care. China has just hosted an impressive Olympic Games and is recognised as a superpower. But its rapidly rising elderly population, by 2030 it's estimated that China's 300 million elderly will consume 10% of the national income, could have a major impact on the speed of China's development. Given what we know about the world's ageing population, it just makes so much sense to encourage people to age well and to promote research into the health and well-being area. Governments need to be encouraged, I think, to be frank about people's seeming indifference to their health and the way they live. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, Australians are now the second longest living people on earth. That's great, but what's the point of living longer if your health lets you down? We know, for instance, that we have a serious obesity problem in Australia, which will impact on people's long-term health and our health and welfare purse. Diabetes is running in epidemic proportions primarily because of poor lifestyle choices. Arthritis affects almost 4 million Australians, and many joint problems occur because people are overweight. But we're so polite about this. I chaired Arthritis Australia for 3 years. I've had a very long involvement with arthritis in this country because my daughter was diagnosed with a rare form of juvenile arthritis when she was a teenager. But I remember one government health person who told me, "We don't like the word plump. And we don't like to tell people with arthritis that they're overweight." Well, I don't know why not. I think it's time to take off the velvet glove and put on the iron fist and tell people the truth. No nation can afford the luxury of ignoring the warning signs. Unless people take more responsibility for the way they lead their lives, their future will not be as good as it should be. Health is fundamental to a happy older age, and preventative health is obviously the way to go. And I don't have a problem with restorative health either, especially when it benefits our self-esteem and well-being. I think Australia and the world needs to take the challenge of ageing seriously and to confront it. And perhaps the biggest challenge of all, people have to confront their attitudes to ageing as well. It's just no use putting on a front claiming that age gets better if deep inside us we feel a profound melancholy because we are leaving youth behind. It's no use telling others that a good life awaits us beyond youth if we stand feeling on the brink of exile, longing to return to the valley of our youth. There has to be an enormous attitudinal change to ageing by everyone in the community, and we could begin by putting to rest some of the myths that exist about older people. It's a myth, for instance, that older people can't learn. Certainly they might forget the odd thing or two. But that in no way diminishes their capacity to learn. The truth is that what older people lose in memory they make up for in lack of discrimination. It's a myth that older people are senile and non-participative, that they cost society money. In fact, they represent a wealth of knowledge and participation, and many older people are quite independent, and something like 80% of Australians 65 and over own their own home. It's a myth that we lose sexuality with age. Older people do have sex, and they enjoy it, particularly women, as we're not going to get pregnant any longer. It's time we stopped equating sex with youth. Mind you, sex is a word many people prefer never to associate with older persons. After all, older people are not meant to have sex, let alone enjoy it. And I cannot understand why that attitude persists. What kind of strange thinking goes on in the minds of people that makes them believe that after a certain age people do not want, think or dream about sex? There's plenty of research that proves that a great majority of men and women in their 60s, 70s and 80s lead active, satisfying sex lives. Many of the myths about growing older are ingrained in us from youth, and the general feeling seems to be that when you reach a certain age, you lose your faculties, everything falls apart. And even older people sometimes think like this. No matter how young or how old we are, we must stop seeing ageing as the enemy. It's a psychological principle that often when we stop fighting something and accept it, only then can we conquer it. Applying that principle, we can conquer our fear of ageing. I chaired something called the Seniors Media Network Council for the state government in New South Wales a few years ago, set up to improve the portrayal of older people in the media and advertising. And I met the Australian psychologist Dorothy Rowe, who lives and works in London. And in her book, Time on Our Side, Growing in Wisdom, Not Growing Old, she wrote something that has always appealed to me. We fear time passing, we fear growing old. Why are we afraid? Because we think time, our lived time, is real and the world must be the way we see it. Do we need to be afraid? No. Because we fear old age, we fear life, and fearing life, we fear death. Time is not our enemy. Our enemy is the idea that we have about time and our fears about growing old. I think it's such a wise piece of writing. Of course, a preventative approach to ageing and health is the way to go. We can't avoid getting older, but we can choose how we age in terms of our health. It's all very well to treat the disease, but much better to try to prevent it in the first place. And who could argue with that approach and expect to win? The work being done on the restorative side is amazing, especially in the area of stem cells, and it makes me feel much more confident about my future as an ageing Australian. And I'm fascinated at the work being done in the hormone area. I mean, over the years, my hormones have had much to answer for. But it seems to me that the current anti-ageing research being done with hormones promises to revolutionise the impact of the ageing process on our bodies. I hope this conference gets the recognition and publicity that it deserves so that its message can be delivered not just around Australia but to as wide an audience as possible. Ageing is inevitable, but diseases associated with ageing are optimal. That is a great slogan, and I'd like to see it marketed more than it is. For what it's worth, you certainly have my support. I wish you well for a productive conference. I look forward to hearing about the outcomes, and I now have much pleasure in opening the second Australian Anti-Ageing Medicine Conference. Thank you.